I am Bobby Fischer, the greatest chess player of all time. I'm going to show you a game I played in the 1958 Interzonal Chess Tournament. A time long, long ago, in the town of Portorož, far, far away in Slovenia. I was only 15 years old, but already the two-time U.S. chess champion, and it is in this tournament that I first gained my grandmaster status. My unfortunate foe in this game is Bent Larsen, the Danish grandmaster.
We will see who is unfortunate and who gets tripped up in this game.
Come in.
I'll crush you, like a puny bear in the woods.
You will fumble your way to a loss, as usual.
Why are you so clumsy?
I have chosen this game to show you because it reminds me of...
Jack and the Beanstalk. That's my favorite novel. Donald, can I read this to you?
Well, I want to keep you happy. Let's hear how it goes.
Thank you, Donald.
I am the white pieces.
Constantly talking. Move!
Be careful what you wish for. This story begins with pawn to e4.
Predictable. Always the same first move as white. Pawn e4, pawn e4. My move. Pawn to c5.
This storyline I know very well.
I won't need a thing. I'm prepared for everything.
Knight to f3.
We shall see. Pawn to d6.
Pawn to d4.
Pawn takes pawn.
Knight takes pawn.
Knight to f6.
And my knight to c3.
Pawn to g6.
Ah, the dragon variation of the Sicilian.
This calls for action.
Bishop to e3. Basic theory.
And of course, my bishop will be fianchetto to g7.
Just an aside for those of you not too familiar with this line, if Bent would have been foolish enough to play knight to g4...
But of course, I was not.
As I was saying, after moving his knight to g4 to put pressure on my bishop at e3, it would have been a losing move. The downfall would start with bishop to b5 check. Then if knight to c6...
Pardon me, sir. My name is Shawfish Holmes. Pointing out lines of interest is my specialty. Allow me to demonstrate.
Since we're mixing in fairy tale stuff, a robot trying to show up Bobby Fischer with chess analysis? Seems about right. Go ahead, Holmes.
You are too kind. I hope not to disappoint. Now, after Bent's questionable move of knight to g4.
Not my move.
Yes, of course. After this, not Bent's moves of knight to g4 and c6. Which, by the way, is a much better move than bishop to d7, as white is now free to capture the knight because the bishop is pinned. Black is now short a piece and losing. So, back to black's move of knight to c6, and then knight captures knight. Pawn captures knight. Bishop captures pawn, with check. Now, the rook will fall after the bishop blocks at d7. Black is now short a pawn, the exchange, and is certainly losing. The rest of the analysis would even bore Bobby.
Don't think I wasn't already bored. So, back to the actual game with Bent's fianchettoed bishop at g7. I'll prevent any immediate ideas of black's knight moving to g4 with pawn to f3.
Of course, and I will now castle on the king side.
Queen to d2.
Knight to c6.
And bishop to c4. My favorite spot for the white bishop because it's pointed at the vulnerable pawn at f7. And because it prevents the immediate threat of pawn to d5.
So, you think you're a smart guy, huh?
It must be wonderful to be allowed to do everything you want to, whenever you want to.
We'll see how clever you are after I take your knight.
And this is what I think of that move.
Oh, you don't get around much, do you?
Well, what do you mean?
You've made a mistake. That's what I mean.
In fact, you are correct, Bobby. I see at least two better moves, with knight to e5 or rook to b8, both threatening the bishop's position at c4.
Of course I'm right. In fact...
Fear nothing when you're in the right. That's my motto.
You two talk too much. I am in a good position. Now move.
Okay, but...
When are you going to grow up and get some sense?
Probably never. Watch and learn. Bishop captures knight.
And here comes my own instructive move. Bishop to e6. I am willing to trade bishops. Are you?
I would, but
Parting is such sorrow.
bishop to b3.
Time for my queen to make an entrance. Queen to a5.
Your Highness.
I hope she likes that part of town, because she'll be stuck on that square for most of the game. Maybe a refreshment while you sit idle?
I wonder if I could have a glass of water.
Yes, Your Highness.
I'll even castle queenside, just to keep her company.
Oh, I have plans for her. Starting with pawn to b5.
Interesting, but nothing more. And easy enough to add a little assistance for my a-pawn.
I won't let him take you.
King to b1.
See? What did I tell you, Henry? I protected you.
Now what?
You will need the help. Pawn to b4.
I could take out your bishop, but I think I'd rather complicate the situation with knight to d5. Many moves for you to consider.
Consider this. Bishop captures knight.
Yes, the proper move. Much weaker would have been, knight captures knight. Then bishop captures bishop. King takes bishop. Pawn captures knight. Bishop falls back to c7. Then, the attack begins on the king side, with pawn moving to h4. Black can counter with pawn to h5. But, white will increase the pressure with pawn to g4. Black's rook can add support at h8. But, white can then point its rook at black's c-pawn. White will have the initiative, and is winning.
Enough from you. Back to my endorsed move of capturing Bobby's knight with my bishop.
And I capture your bishop with mine.
And I will activate my rook to c8.
You have just made the losing move. Time to unleash my attack now.
You have puny dogs. I am playing for the win, and now control the c-file. Move, child.
Unfortunately, Mr. Larsen, Bobby is correct. Your only real chance for a win was to take Bobby's bishop with your knight. Then, pawn captures knight. Queen takes pawn. Rook to e1. Bishop takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Queen to c5. Queen captures queen. Pawn takes queen. Then, rook captures pawn. And, this game will likely end in a draw.
But Bent did not have the foresight to take my bishop. And you will not get a second chance. Bishop to b3.
What is this nonsense?
Where did you go? Oh, come on. This is no time to play games.
And so I will continue with my plan, with rook to c7, making room to double up my rooks, and keep watch over my a-pawn.
Makes no difference.
You gotta get up awfully early in the morning to put anything over on me. Come on, Henry.
I have too much aimed at your king, and have won many games in this position. Time to march my pawn to h4.
You can march your little pawn, but I have a reply for you.
Is it?
I gotta say goodbye now.
No, funny guy. I'll prepare to march my own attack with queen to b5.
Too slow.
Do you mind if I kiss you goodbye?
My line of attack will reach you first. Pawn to h5.
Look! Look! The beanstalk!
No matter. And no ignoring this. Rook to c8.
You are correct to not take the h-pawn, Bent, because it could have easily led to mate. I will show all who are interested. If the g-pawn captures the h-pawn, then Bobby will move his pawn to g4. Then, pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight captures at e4, with tempo on the queen. Queen simply moves to h2, and threatens mate in 1. Knight defends at g5. Bishop captures bishop, to remove a defender, and open the g-file. King captures bishop. Rook to d5. Rook moves to defend, at c5. Then, the queen moves into h6, with check, to begin the kill. The king is forced to g8, to extend the game. Then, rook captures the knight, with check. Rook captures rook. Then, the final dagger, with queen captures pawn, for mate.
Yes, yes, and I did not make such a blunder. Now, back to my doubled up rooks.
Because I fear nothing when I am in the right. Whoever pushes me around will find me full of fight.
And back to my winning attack, with pawn captures pawn.
'Cause I fear absolutely nothing when I am in the right.
Your f-pawn is pinned, with very few choices to defend against my pawn's threats. So now, I believe...
A time will come for rolled up sleeves, and it might help to have a fist on hand.
Yes, yes, I know.
There's only one thing to be done. I don't go looking for a fight, but I have never run away from one.
H-pawn captures pawn, opening up that damnable H-file.
And, if he had the absolutely awful idea of a counterattack, by applying pressure on the bishop, with e5, then the f-pawn will fall. With check on the king.
But only fools will take a dare.
Then, king to f8. Bishop to e3. Rook to d8, to protect the backward pawn. Bishop to h6. Then, the best move is rook captures the very dangerous pawn at f7. Or if bishop captures bishop, then queen captures bishop. And, Bent, will be mated soon after king to e7. Then rook captures pawn. King captures rook. Queen captures knight, with check. King, runs, to c5. Then queen captures rook, with mate in 8. So, back to rook captures pawn, then queen to g5. Rook to d7. Bishop takes rook. Rook takes bishop. Bishop takes bishop, with check. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes knight, with check. Rook to f7. Then queen takes pawn with check. And black will soon lose.
All infantile moves. Why do you even mention my name when spouting out such nonsense? I'm certainly not.
Afraid of giants? Now isn't that preposterous?
I have taken your g-pawn. Now move!
If you insist, pawn to g4. Your knight is in trouble.
If you smell trouble in the air,
I'll hold my breath until a breeze blows by.
We shall see. I still have ideas of my own. Pawn to a5. And know this.
I fear nothing when I am in the right.
You're one move too late. Say hello to my little friend. Pawn to g5.
Your hands are most definitely not around my neck yet. I will block off the open file with knight to h5.
And I will sack my rook.
Ready or not, here I come!
Rook captures knight.
Don't stand there with your mouth wide open, say something.
Pawn captures rook?
Panicking?
Undoubtedly. A much stronger move was bishop captures bishop. Then, rook to h6. Bishop, back to g7, to defend the king. Queen to f4, threatening check. Bishop takes rook. Queen captures pawn with check. King to h8. Pawn captures bishop. Queen to e5, protecting against mate. Then queen captures pawn. And Bobby should still win, but Bent would have a fighting chance.
That's enough from you, Sharefish.
I can put you back in the cupboard if you don't shut up.
Back to your pawn completing my rook sack. And I'm feeling pretty good right now. How about you, Bent? Time to move in. Pawn to g6.
I will apply my own pressure now, with pawn to e5.
You insist on making the wrong move. and leaving my bishop on the board.
Yes, I'm afraid his king will soon fall. He would likely still have lost, but it was technically better, with bishop captures bishop. So, I have an idea.
I'll show you what you're supposed to do.
You show me and I'll show him.
Bishop takes bishop. Then pawn captures pawn with check. And if king moves to h8, then mate with queen to h6, so the best move is king to h7. Then queen captures bishop. Queen to g5. Rook to g1. Pawn to e5, attacking the queen. Queen to d1. Queen to h6. Pawn to f4. Pawn captures pawn. Pawn to e5, making a pathway for the queen. Pawn captures pawn. Queen to d3 with check. King to h8. Then, rook to g8 sets up mate. Rook captures rook. Then finally, pawn captures rook, with mate.
You two are very annoying, with your nitpicking and constant analysis. Refute my move of pawn to e5.
As you wish. Pawn captures pawn. Check.
King to f8.
Bishop to e3.
I will now sacrifice my d-pawn to rid myself of your pawn in front of my king. Pawn to d5.
Will it work?
She's asking me, will it work?
A very temporary solution, and your defense has very little chance of success. But if you like, we can still...
Dance?
Yes.
Pawn captures pawn.
Now I take your annoying pawn.
And now I annoy your rook with my passed pawn. Pawn to d6, with a discovered attack against your rook. What do you think about that?
Oh, it's a lovely night to be somebody else.
Rook to f6.
Nice try, but the chase is now on. Bishop to g5.
I grow tired of this chase already. I'll see if I can cook up another plan. Queen to b7.
Bishop captures rook.
Bishop captures bishop.
And my passed pawn moves forward to d7. And I can only imagine how this makes you feel.
A good move, Bobby, but you missed mate in 7.
Huh? Is that right? No!
Ha! Now I laugh when you miss moves that are right in front of your face.
Enough from you. Move, Mr. Larsen. This chase will soon end. Just a few more pummeling moves to finish you.
Fine. Rook to d8.
Prepare yourself, because...
Ready or not, here I come!
Queen to d6. Check.
This dance is over. With that move, I resign. And
I never want to speak to you again as long as I live.
And, I will be happy to explain why Mr. Larsen resigned. And why there is no need to continue on. It's mate in 6, I will demonstrate.
No, not this time, as I will take great pleasure in showing how my friend will fall.
He went clear through to China.
If you insist.
I do, but first, I'm curious to see what the people of Slovenia think of my victory. To please the crowd here, here's how I'd finish him. After he moves his king to g7, then I move my rook to g1 with check, king to h7, queen captures bishop, queen captures pawn, queen to g6, check, king to h8, queen to h5, check, queen to h7, queen takes pawn, check. Then, queen blocks for the king one last time and moves to g7.
I'm waiting. Crown me.
That's an odd request.
Queen captures queen and checkmate.
Just like you, Bobby. Always gloating over a win.
And it's just like you to lose to me. Now go tell all of the other grandmasters what this 15-year-old will do to them, too.
Come on.
We'll tell them all about the legend of the giant killer.
You are a child. You will never win anything.
Wrong. I will be the greatest chess player of all time. And why?
I fear nothing when I am in the right. Whoever pushes me around will find me full of fight. I fear nothing when I do nothing wrong, and so I toddle on my way and sing a merry song. Jack and the Beanstalk will long remember when he shinned up the stalk to bear the giant in his den. Once up the beanstalk, if Jack is set upon, then Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, or Jack your good is gone.